All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining yet another session of our webinars with our Veeam partners. My name is Karl Camilleri. I am Cloud Services Product Manager for phoenixNAP. And today we're going to speak about how organizations can work on enhancing cyber resiliency in their IT environments. With me today is Michael Deemer, Systems Engineer from Veeam. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Carl.
All right, so very interesting topic today as we speak about cyber resilience, right? If we can go to the next slide, we can identify the definition of cyber resilience, right? The ability to anticipate, withstand, and recover from adverse conditions. And most of this has been very detailed and reported by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which have invested a lot to understand and help businesses with their posture around cybersecurity. So in the next slide, we're going to see how cybersecurity and cyber resilience differentiate. We're all commonly friendly with the cybersecurity term, right? It's used among our industry. It's a thing which we mention when it comes to ransomware, when it comes to viruses, when it comes to attacks. But cyber resiliency is another topic which also requires its own importance. And between them, they make up the prevention and making sure that our environments are abreast with the latest industry requirements. So when it comes to cybersecurity, mostly we're talking about the technologies we have in place, right? The methods to safeguard our environments, such as firewalls, backup technologies, and other solutions that we have implemented to keep our data safe from external cyber threats or even internal. It also mentions the reduction of the risk on the attack itself, right, by protecting critical assets that we have identified internally. We also speak about the continuity plan on how businesses can keep operating, considering the technologies that the company has invested in. On the other hand, cyber resilience is a term which is essentially used mainly to make reference on to quickly recover from disruptions to IT systems and critical infrastructure. This also combines with business processes that we have in place, right, within our organizations. So it's a term which has a significant involvement with business units in our organizations when it comes to discussions around cyber resilience. And it's an approach of how we can manage our technologies that we have invested and realign processes around those to define the capabilities in order to make sure we come up back online from any disruption that we might face. So in terms of the main focus points which we'll talk about today are the technologies and the processes around these, right? The procedures and, for example, the data protection plans that we might have, and strategies in terms of identifying the risks, identifying which workloads may have the most impact, and identifying the focus on minimizing the actual breach as much as possible. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to see here a little bit of what the businesses are telling us in the industry. This is a report done by Accenture, which shows the level of interest organizations are looking at when it comes to beefing up our security posture. And it shows although the security investment, which continues to rise up, and cloud still has a complex kind of relationship with security, right? How we can make both work together in terms of continuation of our end results, right? It shows also the cybersecurity posture of this research. So it defines how organizations need to give CISOs more capacity, right? More discussions at the top table at business level, and be threat centric, right? Be able to identify and showcase how actual impacts may result in the negative or disruption within the business processes. So in terms of this report, the idea is that the organizations have now been even considering the remote workforce that we've recently went through, most organizations went through, shows us that still nothing has changed in terms of being able to protect yourself even more. So it has, on the flip side, shown that respondents are even actively participating in these discussions with partners and customers alike. So if we move over to the next slide, we can see a very nice infographic here showcasing how we can make use of the cyber resiliency solution. So the why section is to identify why we're doing it, right? Which segments of our organization will this impact when it comes to the actual cause of cyber attack? How can we make our infrastructure difficult to be taken down, right? What risks can we identify in order for us to kind of bounce back quickly, right, after a disruption, and continuously deliver the intended outcome that customers are expecting, right, despite an issue of a cyber attack. And also for the ability to prepare the changing conditions of the attack, depending on the type of attack, and withstanding and recover as rapidly as possible to continue the service level of the organization. So in terms of being able to really and truly understand the fact that it's a matter of when, right, we're going to be impacted. That is the kind of measurement we're seeing in this industry. Get ready for it and make sure that you have everything in line to prevent data loss. So the why section here is actually identifies all of this, right? The business processes, the entities that need to be informed and whatnot. On the right side, we can see the what. So which items do we need to go through in order to identify the right disaster recovery plan? So we can see the goals that we want to achieve, right? Which applications, which workloads do we still want to keep online and powered? We need to identify what are less critical, right, in order to also make sure that the resources of our data center that we're hosting these applications and databases on can maintain the continuation of the service. And identifying the objectives, right? Which teams need to be prepared, who has to be involved, who needs to be identified when it comes to the actual attack of any cyber attack. And the how is how are we going to do all this in between, right? On one hand, we have the technologies. On the other hand, we have the business operations, and we need to try and define the way of making sure, finding the right sweet spot to make sure that the service of our applications and databases keep their own service online and running. So this sheet is kind of makes us realize on how we can minimize interruptions to normal operations. What can we limit in terms of extent of disruption, right? Which areas can we make sure that less damage as possible, and how to establish alternative means of operation, right? Getting back online. And we're going to show you later on in this presentation on how we can do that, both from the technologies that we work with from Veeam and also some of the services that we offer in this respect. If we follow up on the next slide here, these are some of the points that the industry looks at when it comes to cyber resilience. And this slide has a list of techniques that are actually critical to having the right posture within the cybersecurity framework that we've mentioned earlier. So when it comes to techniques in terms of cyber resilience, we can see the way on adaptive response, right? So how are we able to make sure that we adapt to the right procedure when it comes to shifting over our workloads to a healthier environment? We've looked at monitoring, right? Continuous monitoring of our systems in order to identify historical trends and how these could be mitigated if there was an actual eventuality. Diversity, in order to identify the different technologies that we might have in place, right? Different operating systems, but then at the end they need to work in harmony together when it comes to shifting the workloads to another site, or even bringing up a repository where we might have secondary services running. Realignment, redundancy, segmentation, right? These are all critical areas that need to be part and parcel with the data protection plan that we have. And obviously these are in some way can affect and create business blockers, right? Business operations. But these are the most things that we need to understand, right? How and what level of capacity are we able to sustain our environment when it comes to a cyber attack. Moving on to the next slide, where we can see here the key steps when it comes to cyber resilience, right? So risk assessment, the way we can identify threats to our data and business continuity, right? So identifying those key areas where we want to make sure protection is at its highest level. And business continuity also to show us which applications, which workloads, which databases need to keep on running in order for the business to continue providing its expected service delivery. Strategy framework. So this is a framework which we mentioned earlier, where we can identify the structure for the cyber resilience, right? What defines it, what risks are in place, which teams have to be involved, and defines the objectives, right? What are the end results of this framework? What do we need to achieve? Another area, which is training through simulation. We've seen this is a very effective way on how customers can simulate incidents to test their own environments and make sure that when there is an actual impact, the procedures and the technologies have in place really work. And this also shows another way on how we can actually make more impact internally in our business operations to show them how the investment, what fruit is the investment releasing, right? What are the end results? What is the value of the investment that the company has made through the security posture? So this is also a nice way to make more awareness, create more awareness internally within your organizations. Backups, obviously, as you may all know from experience, this has not been a trend which started yesterday, right? We've been working with backups since I think the first day we started using IT systems, but this was always the way on how we can actually make sure we cover our assets, right? We make sure that we have the right backups in place, and also archiving these backups today, as we see with object storage and other technologies, the cost to archive such backups is literally very competitive as it used to be. So that's one area on how we can strengthen our security aspect from that part. And implementing a disaster recovery service, right? Enabling a disaster recovery plan, identifying the recovery point objectives, right? Identifying the recovery time objective. And all this is to identify what is the acceptable service levels following a disaster is to avoid consequences, intolerable consequences associated with that disruption. So that's also another key aspect of maintaining and enhancing your posture with cyber resilience. As we go to the next set of slides, Michael from Veeam will be with us to take us through these slides on how Veeam is actually working on and protecting us and our environments against cyber attacks, and in particular, how to achieve the perfect cyber resilience strategy. Over to you, Mike.
Well, thank you very much, Carl. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Michael Deemer, Systems Engineer here for Veeam Software, and I'll be taking you guys through the Veeam backup and disaster recovery side of the house. Today, we're going to be going over a slew of different information, so sit down, buckle up, and we're going to be going over a lot of good stuff. Carl already went over a ton of good information here today, kind of going over some verticals, some of those particular, foresights kind of coming up in those particular environments, and I'm here today to show you how we can actually protect against that. Now, on our next slide here, the biggest thing that I want to talk about is 3, 2, 1. Now, I'm going to leave that 0 for just a second here. I want to take a quick pause. This quick pause is, even if you guys are having a current backup vendor, and that backup vendor isn't phoenixNAP or Veeam Backup and Replication or Veeam, and you guys aren't knowing about this policy, never heard about this policy, or this isn't something that's in your environment, I would take a screenshot. This isn't a thing that Veeam came up with or phoenixNAP came up with. This is just a master rule against the entire backup sector. Regardless of vertical, regardless of vector, this is something that's absolutely going to be in everybody's wheelhouse, and everybody's going to be able to benefit from this particular rule. Now, let me also break down this rule at a very common level. So the 3 in the 3 different copies, and you see at the bottom where it says 3 BBKs. This is active fulls of your data. So 3 active fulls is what we need, and there's 3 different copies of that particular data. Now, the number 2 in the 3, 2, 1 rule is 2 different forms of media. Think of maybe SSD and NVMe, and then on the other side of that, maybe a tape, right? Some type of different types of repository, different types of media to move that particular types of assets. The reason being for the 2 different forms of media, guess what happens? It's the real world, things break, and guess what happens if during shipment your tape infrastructure got hit, or your SSD or NVMe drives, or whatever instance got wiped while going off to the offsite destination. That's why we have 2. Now, that number one is honestly one of the most important parts. This is having 1 offsite at phoenixNAP, either public, private cloud, a tape infrastructure like Iron Mountain. Regardless of what it is, just having 1 offsite is your absolute golden goose egg for when things burn down. Now, where does that 0 really come into play? So if we pair all those together, 3 different copies of data, 2 different forms of media, and 1 offsite, we can also pair that with Veeam Backup and Recovery Verification. Well, you guys may be going, well, what is Veeam Backup and Recovery Verification? Very good question. That is honestly just Sure Backup. So Sure Backup, and I'll talk a little bit about this more at another corresponding slide, but this at a very high level is where Veeam goes out and tests backup for application tests, ping tests, and heartbeat tests. So that way we know what's actually going on underneath the skin of that particular backup. We know that we can actually do restores. We know the underlying OS is going to be good. And at the end of the day, we're just making sure that from a high availability standpoint, we can recover that data with 0 errors. And that's really the biggest thing that I really want to drive home there. Now, I kind of want to show you here on our next slide what happens when you get hit with ransomware. This is one of those really ugly truths that, unfortunately, it's kind of like if you guys own a house or own an apartment, condo, whatever that may be. One of those attack vectors that when people own a house is termites. And to be brutally honest, it's not a when, it's an if or when is it coming. It's not like, oh, it's never going to come. Termites are going to come. And termites are kind of like ransomware. Unfortunately, they're out there everywhere living in the environment. And unfortunately for us as IT people, ransomware has a very, very, very big attack vector. Whether you're SMB all the way up to enterprise, they really don't care. They're coming for data and they want money. So they're going to be doing a dragnet across the entire internet and seeing what they can catch. Now, with that being said, I kind of want to turn you guys' eyes to the left-hand side of my screen. So in the very middle, you see a hypervisor that's orange. Below that is our storage. Now, let me take a quick pause here. That hypervisor could be VMware, Hyper-V, or Nutanix. Really doesn't matter there. Below that is storage. And before I get into storage, I just want to say that we are agnostic. These aren't the only storage arrays that we can use. These are just a couple that came to mind. So we can do like HPE, Nimble, NetApp with Dell EMC. Some of those just have different integrations, different APIs, and that's why those got brought up. Now, above my hypervisor lives my virtual machines. These virtual machines house my databases, such as SQL or Oracle, applications, such as really almost any application out there that you guys run on a day-to-day basis. Think of even Outlook, right? And then files and data, just your typical lackluster files and data that everybody has out there in the environment. Now, let me draw your eyes a little bit to the right-hand side. You see that little pretty Veeam box? That is Veeam backup and replication. So what happens when ransomware hits, and how do we know we have a good copy? So as you see here, we have those red locks now on our virtual machines. Those virtual machines, again, house our data storage, applications, files. Now, what's going to happen when actually that happens? And basically, let's just say you went to lunch, you came back, you logged into your virtual machine. Everything is going to be completely not in any language that you can read. It's all going to be completely parsed out. And basically, if you minimize all the things that's going on and you look at the back of the desktop screen, there's probably going to be a message that says, hey, you've been hit with cryptoware, you've been hit with ransomware, you've been hit with X, Y, or Z ransomware exploit, and this is how to get the data back. And it's to pay the particular ransomware vector or aggressor, I should say, with some type of monetary value. Most of the time, when they want some type of money, it's coming through Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever Litecoin or whatever cryptocurrency they choose, because that is usually their method of approach. Now, way back in the day, like 10 years ago, there used to be a cool thing where, and this is way before ransomware was a really big target, was you paid the ransom, you got the data back, and really they were just looking for money. At this point in time, that is not the case. Even if you pay the ransom, get your data back, there is absolutely no safeguard saying that they won't, one, crypto lock you again, because that happens way more than you think. Is somebody pays the ransom, wants to keep it off the records, wants to keep it off the books, they go back, they restore the data, they got it back, then a month later, all of a sudden, they're sitting in the same exact seat. Ransomware again, particular exploit. Ransomware A just sold it to ransomware B, and now you are stuck again. Now, how do we know we have a good copy? This all comes down to sure backup, or something else that it's called is on-demand sandbox. An on-demand sandbox at the very end of the day has no internet access outbound, so no vSwitch internet access outbound, and that way you have a fully isolated environment. If you guys need to test anything in there, that's exactly what you need to do, because we need to test to make sure that backup is, one, valid, that everything is good. It's going to test heartbeat test, ping test, and application. Once we know that, we're going to do an AV scan. We're going to make sure that there's no more remnants of that particular ransomware sitting in that particular backup. So that way, when we push it back to production, we're in the free and clear, rather than just compromising production again with pushing another bad backup. Now, one thing I do want to draw your eyes to, the last thing on this particular slide, is leveraging modern storage snapshots, which I'm actually going to get to a little bit more here on our next slide, and I'll kind of go into a lot more high level and very much in depth on leveraging storage snapshots. All right, so here on my next slide, what I want to talk about is the recovery from storage snapshots. Now, with that being said, most people in most organizations have a very typical backup scenario where they're taking a backup. Maybe it's 8 p.m., maybe it's 10 p.m. or 12 p.m., but it's somewhere at night, right? And it's only happening once a day. There's nothing wrong with that, absolutely. If you don't have storage integrations, you don't have these higher caliber storage devices, the APIs aren't going to be available for you, right? But if we do have those LPORs, we do have Dell EMC, or we do have HPE or Nimble, we can start to take advantage of some of their integrations with Veeam and really see the difference between the two. Now, again, it's saying unprotected, but again, you're still getting a backup once a night. there's a huge difference between taking hourly snapshots and one-day backups, which is the granularity that you can go back to. So let's just pretend that you lost data at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, cool. You're only losing till 12. You're only losing the last 58 or 59 minutes until we hit the next hour. Comparatively to if you lost the data at the same point in time, say 1 p.m. in the afternoon, you have to fail back all the way. You're losing all that change rate all the way until 8 p.m. the night prior, right? Because that's when the backup happens. We don't facilitate any of the changes to the metadata cache or the repository until there's been a backup or a snap actually been activated. Now, one other thing I want to mention here is how do we get our data back? And that's called our Explorer series. Veeam is great at this. They build specific applications or explorers for specific applications that are out there that everybody commonly uses, right? Exchange, Active Directory, SQL Server, SharePoint, Oracle. Those are just a list of few. We have a lot more than that. That's just the top 5 or 6 that really came to mind. And that, with that being said, really that's one of the big things and big advantages of the Veeam is you get these tenured granular restore capabilities that sometimes the other particular vendors out there just cannot give you guys due to kind of where we are and how long we've been in the backup game. Now, here on our next slide, what I want to talk about is time to restore and how the options and how you can really manipulate different options here. So again, this is that same video that was a little bit earlier where we have our hypervisors. We still have crypto going on. We still have our storage below that, but we do have a couple options for doing a restore. And this is a great way to do it. Now, option A is going to your backup target or your backup repository, pulling back a restore, whether that's a granular restore directly to databases, files, or data, or we can just do a full-blown virtual machine recovery. If you need to restore the domain controller, you need to restore the SQL Server, Oracle database, whatever that may be, you can just do the entire virtual machine. Now, before that, again, we really want to make sure that we're testing those in a sandbox, making sure that they're valid before doing that restore. But just remember, there is a step before restore, which is testing. Now, we can also pull back from a tape device. But that tape device, if you look at that line, you're going to see that line isn't all the way connected. What that basically means is air gapped. So once that data has left Veeam, it was sent to like an Iron Mountain. So that way there is nobody that's going to be able to go in there and actually touch that particular media set at the tape device, right? So you have that air gapped solution. Same thing with Cloud Connect, where we have immutability and insider protection turned on. Cloud Connect, at the end of the day, this is phoenixNAP. Think of phoenixNAP as that Cloud Connect repository. They have a lot of different goodies that they can offer you. Anything from immutable storage all the way down to insider protection. These things are going to absolutely help you time in and time out. But the big thing here is you have a bunch of different options for restore along the lines of as long as your architecture is in the same boat. Now, I'm talking about just things and knowing that we're protected. Here on my next slide, I want to show you in a specific report and a specific avenue here for Veeam that's going to show you the difference between knowing that you're protected and actually validating that you're protected. And that is called Veeam-1. So Veeam-1, at the end of the day, is a monitoring and reporting analytics application. This application is basically going to do a lot of different things, all the way from backup assessment to combining reports to cover all your backup environments, right? So making sure that we're running reports, we're making sure that there's virtual machines getting protected. If there isn't any virtual machines getting protected, it's going to spit you out a report. Same thing with physical servers, cloud instances. Whatever that may be, Veeam-1 is going to be able to do that there. Now, also the big thing with Veeam-1, it has a ransomware alert, right? This is one of those things that is going to be getting more and more feature sets along the line. So right now we have a ransomware alert. We also do backup reports, making sure that everything is also protected. And if it's not, we'll show you where those particular machines live and why they're not protected. Same thing with Sure Backup. So Sure Backup can also be combined into those automated reports for virtual machines or for Veeam-1, I should say. And that way you have that single pane of glass to really look at all your aggregated data and have that really good peace of mind feeling that you know for 100% fact that, hey, I have an SMTP report that gets sent to me every single day. These are the workloads that are protected, and if anything goes awry, I know where to go from here. Now, one other thing I want to touch on right before I leave this slide is Veeam-1 also does Visio diagrams. So for me, as an admin, I do a lot of Visio diagrams. Well, Veeam-1 can go in there and actually build out an entire environment to IP addresses, subnets, DMZ zones, whatever that may be, and actually segregate it actually how it is inside of the actual environment without guessing and checking. There is no, is it over here? Veeam-1 knows where it is, knows the latency, knows the ingress and egress, and is able to spit out that type of report for you. So now just kind of talking on the face of security, that kind of leads me into my next thing, which is the hardened Linux repository. So our hardened Linux repository is actually going to be on our next slide here, but I really want to talk about what it is. So this is native immutability. Well, what is native immutability? Well, in my eyes, this is something that sits on-prem as like a typical, so if you guys have like a typical, maybe a NAP, like maybe a QNAP or Synology that you guys land on. It doesn't have to necessarily be that. I'm just kind of giving those terminologies that for most people kind of understand. So you have a local repository that your backups land on. Well, what if we could change that local repository from just being like an SMB share or an NFS share that's not technically protected to a protected share? And that's how we do that with Linux. Linux is an immutable and malware-safe storage repository for backups. Now, what does it do? It's going to prevent any malicious encryption or deletion. And that is huge, right? So if they can encrypt your data, you have crypto lock. If they delete your data, you're completely out of luck. So with those two combined, we can make sure that we're safeguarding that. Now, how do we do that? That's actually going to be on my next slide here, and I'm going to get a little bit more into the weeds. So why do we have a hardened Linux repository, and what makes all the insides tick? Okay, so very first is this is a malware-safe repository. How is it a malware-safe repository? As long as we set up what's called insider protection comes from Cloud Connect. Cloud Connect is associated with phoenixNAP. So phoenixNAP actually allocates this protocol called, and it has some logic behind it that's called insider protection. Insider protection is turned on. That is one of the pieces of the puzzle. Now, what is it actually going to do? It's actually going to deny the deletion of any backups. So if, let's just say, the worst of the worst happened, a rogue admin got in, he already knows the credentials, and he goes in there and he wants to delete everything because he has admin rights to do so. He's a rogue admin. Well, to him, he's going to look like he was successful. But at the end of the day, was he successful? Absolutely not. In the logs, it's actually going to tell him to kick rocks and pound sand. Nothing that he can do will overwrite that particular data. Now, the other portion of that, with that kind of being in junction, is the immutable flag portion. A immutable flag is saying, hey, whatever data has landed in my immutable repository with Linux, it can't be overwritten during this time that I have an immutable flag, right? So this immutable flag is basically a line in the sand saying there's nobody that's going to be able to overwrite this particular data until my retention is actually met. Okay, cool. So going into a little bit more about the weeds here, I want to show you some of the other things that actually are on the hardened Linux repository here on the next slide, which is going to be, if you guys are used to Linux, we do not use the root account. And all you Linux admins out there are just, I can tell that you guys are grinning from ear to ear. Yes, we don't use root account because if you have root account, basically you have basically the same thing as Windows, which is top-level domain control rights or an admin policy, basically on par for each other. Now, at the end of the day, we are leveraging XFS to leverage the block cloning availability that Linux actually just comes native with. Now, I want to take your eyes to the very side of the screen, those two green boxes. We only use those single-use only credentials, and then we actually burn those bridges, right? And at the very end, that's how easy it is to set an immutable flag. If you want to set an immutable flag, you literally just click the box, set the number of days that you want that retention to be, and all of a sudden, you have a full-blown hardened repository on-prem. Now, going on a little bit here on our next slide, I want to talk about archive tier. But before I get into archive tier, You guys are probably looking at this diagram and going, well, what the heck is that? Let me break that down for you. All right, so we have performance tier, we have capacity tier, and we have archive tier. So I'm going to work from the left to the right-hand side. Now, at the end of the day, what is this actually called? What we're looking at is actually called SOBR, Scale Out Backup Repository Job. Basically, this is putting in different buckets or different avenues for repositories, and we present them as one repository to Veeam. So Veeam has the insights and the particular knowledge and logic to actually move these data corresponding through these repositories, acting as one job. All right, so performance tier, this is your local spinning disk tier. So this is what's actually associated with Veeam backup and replication. This could be a NAP, this could be a file share, this could be a QNAP, this could be iSCSI, this could be fiber channel, this could be NVMe or SSD drives. Whatever that may be, Veeam is very agnostic to that side. Realistically, what we're looking for here is however you want to present that as spinning disk to the Veeam backup and replication server is performance tier. Performance tier is the first tier that you have to land on first. So you have to land locally before we can send to capacity tier or archive tier. Now, what is capacity tier? Well, very good question. Capacity tier is object storage. In this particular case, Amazon or Azure. Is there more out there than those two? Absolutely. There is so many. But I'm not going to get into all of the different vendors that we support. Just would be the next 45 minutes just naming out vendors out loud. Not fun. All right, so these are the two top dogs, the two 5,000-pound gorillas that sit in object storage and that are in the public cloud, right? All right, so that is your object storage bucket. So if you went to Amazon S3, you could, of course, go to their S3 bucket, hot or cold. Same thing with Microsoft Azure. Going to Blob, the Blob bucket can be also hot or cold. Basically, if you guys are not understanding the sense of hot and cool tier, basically think of more ready, higher end spinning disk is hot, colder is slower spinning disk and takes a little longer to pull out. Now, what I really wanted to touch on is archive tier, because archive tier is a little bit of a newer tier for Veeam. This is for GFS data and GFS data only. Some of you guys going, well, what the heck is GFS? And that is grandfather, father, son, or more commonly known as active fulls of your particular data. So if you need to take a weekly, you need to take a monthly, you need to take a yearly, right, of those particular environments as an active full and push those to the corresponding object storage cloud for deep archival, you can absolutely do so. So if you went for, if your capacity tier was Amazon S3, you could absolutely push into Amazon Glacier. Same thing with Azure. You landed at Blob, you could absolutely push GFS data and GFS data only to the specific Blob storage archive tier. Now, one thing I want to note, just to be very clear here, when you pull out of Glacier or you pull out of storage archive tier, which is really cold tiers, which they really don't, they want you to pull out of because that's how they make their money, but realistically, you don't want to pull out of there as the consumer because that's where things start to cost the most amount of monetary value. To land in Glacier or to land in Blob, archive tier, cheap, pennies on the dollar. To pull it back out, that's where things get a little more hairy and a little more pricey when we're pulling back down over that. Now, the last thing I want to touch on before I pass it back over is I'm going to be actually on our next slide here, which is going to be CDP, or more commonly known as Continuous Data Protection. Now, what is CDP at the end of the day? This is a resilient way to make critical workloads have near zero time recovery point objective, or RPO. And at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're minimizing the data loss and the recoverability of the last point in time state. Basically, all that verbiage boils down to we're backing up that particular machine at a very high frequency. Earlier, how I showed you the difference between taking an 8 p.m. backup compared to an hourly backup, this is completely different. Imagine this taking a backup every 60 seconds, every 2 minutes, every 3 minutes. So the most amount of data that you're losing is so minuscule because we're backing it up and replicating that data so often. So again, it really comes down to what those workloads are doing, and that is really a good understanding. If they're a mission critical workload, Do they need CDP? Absolutely. And this is a good way to think of it. If that server, if that application, that database goes down, do you lose 10, 20, 50 millions of dollars an hour? If you do, CDP, because you need to make sure that you're resilient, you can be back up in line, and you can make sure that it's not going to affect production, because that is the biggest thing that we're really trying to drive home here, is if production is never affected or never distributed, you're always going to be continue to go on just like nothing ever happened, and making sure that you have the 3-2-1 policy in place, and making sure that your critically workload application servers are protected is another big site. All right, so with all that said and done, I'm going to pass it back over to our Platinum BCSP partner, Karl, and he'll take it from here. Again, thanks, guys, for letting me ramble for a little bit. So,
Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks for that very insightful information on the technologies that Veeam are working on. Always interesting to learn more about that, and to give you guys a little bit of a perspective on how we can entertain these solutions, right, that Mike was mentioning before. So these are the 4 main pillars that we provide as phoenixNAP in terms of data protection. And as you can see on the right-hand side, Veeam Cloud Connect is our offsite cloud backup repository service for our customers. This is where we kind of support you with the 3-2-1-0 rule that Mike was mentioning earlier, right? We fit in that particular concept so that our customers can create an offsite backup solution for their jobs that are as an extension to their local backups, right? This is a way on how clients are already utilizing this Veeam service already, and even customers who are looking at creating or setting up new backup solutions from Veeam. We have been supporting this service for quite a while now, and this is where the insider protection capabilities take place. When it comes to the scale-out backup repository that Mike was mentioning, this is where we extend your local backup repository and be able to protect it with additional protection from the insider protection technologies. When it comes to immutability, immutability is also a key part of this service that we offer, and we support this over our object storage service for customers who are cost conscious, and even the ability to expand further into that type of repository. Moving over to our second pillar on protecting our data, when it comes to Office 365, a product you're all familiar with, we are supporting today the protection of Exchange mailboxes, right? Microsoft Online Exchange mailboxes. It comes to a discussion where it all boils down that kind of Microsoft are already backing up the solution. There's a really misconception out there that Office 365 is backed up. It is highly available. Yes, it is highly available from Microsoft within their data centers, but the protection of the data has to be on us, right? On the tenants that are utilizing this service. And as a company, phoenixNAP, we are now providing this service on a per mailbox plan. So that is a very simple way to consume such a backup service. And we are protecting what comes with Office 365, right? The mailbox itself, SharePoint libraries, Teams, and together with the recent changes in remote workforce, Office 365 has gained a lot of usage. So this is one key area which we need to make sure that we are protecting as well, and also falls as part of our cyber resilience, right? Being able to spin up any data that we had in the SharePoint libraries or any mailboxes that got impacted, because there relies certain information nowadays through this kind of communication. Obviously, internally, we are utilizing object storage as well for being able to provide added security enhancements of immutability, and also to be able to be competitive in the market, right? To be able to provide minimal costs for for expanding into the retention of the data. Moving over to our third product, Veeam Disaster Recovery. So Veeam Disaster Recovery basically is our solution that we provide for customers in order to be able to switch over to a healthier site, one area that we were mentioning before. So the idea is that we have a product called Data Security Cloud, which we'll even mention here in this slide later on. But basically, we use this product as a target for replication, right? This is the comfort zone, as we speak, for our customers in order to change the pointer through Veeam technologies over to a hosted solution, which is already secured by default, right, from our infrastructure side. One other good aspect that I want to mention here with Veeam Disaster Recovery is that we are providing 1 week of free failover per year. And this is something that we want to live up by our own promises, right? But by what we were mentioning before, in order to simulate and in order to run by this these security data protection plans that our organizations work on, and want to give this as a value add to our customers in order to have more assurance that the disaster recovery that they have invested in actually is tested. Data Security Cloud, this is one of the main products that we have for the hosting of infrastructure. Basically, we are providing a secured way on how we can virtualize cloud environments, right, with Veeam backups out of the box. So this is a very interesting product where we have baked in data protection from Veeam as part of the solution that we offer. So in this slide, I'm explaining a little bit on the areas of how we support our customers with this product. So we have invested in top-of-the-range hardware infrastructure to host your workloads. We have the processors that are Intel-based processors, which we have invested in new types of chipsets as per our partnership with Intel. Built-in security, as mentioned earlier, right? So we have the right antivirus software built in, baked into that product. And we also provide the ability to monitor the services when it comes to the VMware tools that we provide both to our systems engineers, our support engineers, and also to our customers. And the cost efficiency of the product, right? We make sure that we're using cutting edge technology, but on the other hand, want to make sure that it is it's interesting for our customers to be able to be cost efficient when it comes to hosting their workloads on the cloud. Moving over to the next slide, we can see here the pillar that is maintaining our data security cloud, integrated backups, detection and response, threat intelligence, microsegmentation, and high performance hardware, all together baked in one single product for either the use case of data protection, right, disaster recovery, but also to host your workloads if that is another avenue that your organizations are interested in. It's a product which is secure by design. We have baked in encryption services through Intel, SGX. We have also updated our recent, we keep our infrastructure hardware support services up to date, so we can keep this product PCI compliant and HIPAA ready for our customers. Moving on to the next slide. Our collaboration with Veeam, right? We have been a Veeam partner for a number of years now. We work hand in hand on helping organizations implement data protection services. We provide we actually have technical teams that are dedicated towards this, and we provide the fast recovery services as part of our data protection services within the regions that we have available geographically. Moving over to the next slide, we're going to show the locations of our data centers. North America, we have our flagships data centers in Phoenix, Arizona, and Ashburn, Virginia. And supporting that is our Atlanta and Chicago, together with Seattle and Los Angeles data centers. We have parity across these locations with a number of our services and products that we use. And together with the European data centers, we can provide more services closer to your actual usage workloads. All right, so if we have any interest in reaching out to us on this subject when it comes to backups and disaster recovery, please feel free to leave your comments here. And also, if you have any questions that you might have around this presentation, please feel free to leave them in the polls section. Sorry, in the questions section. All right. So I think we do have some questions coming up. Okay, so first question. Is Veeam Insider Protection priced the same way as standard backup storage? So when it comes to the Veeam Cloud Connect service that we provide, we have two products that we support our customers. So one of the products is the standard Cloud Connect repository for cloud backups. And then we have another one for that includes the protection of insider protection, right? The way that we have invested into this product is through technologies with Veeam, as we mentioned earlier. And currently, we are also offering 20% off on insider protection enabled storage for customers that are interested in this service. So the answer is yes, there is a difference in the price, obviously for the reason that in order for us to sustain insider protection, one has to understand the commitment on the repositories that we will need to make, considering the way insider protection works. All right, here's another question that maybe Mike can take. He can lay it out here. Is cyber resilience possible in remote work environments? I'm sure Veeam has seen a lot of insight into this aspect recently when it comes to remote work. So, Mike, would you be able to give us some insight into this?
Yeah, of course, Karl. So one thing I do want to level set with everybody is, yeah, it's absolutely completely doable with 100% certainty. Now, there is some challenges around the vectors and, you know, people being in different particular remote sites, and especially since, you know, the last 2 years, I'm not even going to bring up the word, but the last 2 years have just changed, right? We really went from this in-office presence, and in an office presence, one of the biggest things is everybody's most of the time on a corporate network. Corporate networks most of the time have Active Directory, right? Now, also on a corporate network, what do they have? firewalls, they have switches, they have layer 3 switches, layer 4 switches. They have very high security parameters kind of accessing for all of their internal data. Now, when that all went away and everybody went back to on-home, these access points now became your home office, right? And I can tell you, and one of the biggest things that I will say, I used to be an MSP admin for a long time. Most people that are out there working from home as of today probably have the same username and password that's on the bottom of their on their basic, like their modem, their ISP, whoever that may be. So just something to note is, yes, it's absolutely still doable. The multiple network access points kind of generate some more remote employees problems, but at the end of the day, absolutely accomplishable. And the last thing I will say, just on the threat vector side, change your guys' passwords on your local, modems and firewalls. It will save your guys' rear ends all day long. And that's my 2 cents there. Thanks, Karl.
Thank you so much, Mike, for answering that question for us. All right, and with that, I want to thank you all for joining us today. I hope it was an interesting topic, and hope to see you guys soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.